I stood ankle-deep in cedar swamp water, my gloves stiff with ice, while something moved above our lantern light. The pines held their breath. A sound like a child coughing came from the branches, then answered itself from behind us, nearer. Sergeant O'Hara raised his rifle, and the flame bent sideways as if a door had opened. On the snow lay a fresh hoofprint full of blood-dark slush. Many years later, men still pressed me for this relation. If you find it worthy, set your mark of liking, subscribe to our chronicle, and leave a remark below. It began 3 weeks earlier, on January 20th, 1909. It began 3 weeks earlier, on January 20th, 1909, when the Camden ferries ran under a thin skin of river ice and every newsboy cried of the devil in the pines. Schools had barred their doors in Gloucester and Burlington. The farmers posted lanterns on gate posts as if light alone were law. Mr. Caldwell of the Courier engaged me because I knew the survey lines between Hamilton and Batstow, and because I carried instruments without romance. With us went Sergeant Patrick O'Hara of the State Constabulary, thick in the shoulders and sparing of speech, and Elias Fenwick, a cranberry hand from Chatsworth, who could read sand as others read print. We took a hired wagon from the Pennsylvania Railroad station at Hamilton, our packs under oilcloth, a plane table and chain, a pocket compass, 2 bullseye lanterns, and O'Hara, his Winchester. At noon, we halted by a cedar run where the ice sang underfoot. Caldwell struck a match, shared his plug tobacco, and spoke of his wife in Market Street and the child she expected in March. I answered with a picture of my own mother in Woodbury, her hands always smelling of lye soap. Fenwick listened, whittling a pine knot, and at last said, not looking up, that the woods had been restless since the first snow. A far-off cry rose then, thin as a fife, and ceased so abruptly that even the crows seemed to forget their voices. O'Hara named it a fox, and I agreed, though my barometer needle trembled without wind. We went on, and behind us the wagon horse shied once at nothing plainly. By the second day we had left the last proper road and followed Fenwick along sand lanes used by charcoal men. The country opened in low grey stretches of scrub, with pitch pine and stunted oak, and here and there a frozen bog, where cranberries showed like dull beads under the ice. The air smelled clean, yet it carried another odour at intervals. A faint sourness, as if some pen of animals stood just out of sight. We slept the first night in an abandoned glassworker's shack near Atzian, its chimney fallen in. Caldwell wrote by lantern, copying names and places from the clippings he carried, and O'Hara cleaned his rifle with patient strokes. Fenwick set no trap and took no snare. When I asked him why, he said only, "Nothing here will come." Toward midnight, a sound travelled over the flats, a long rising call that held a note too steady for any owl. O'Hara called back as a jest, and the same call returned, the very cadence of his own throat. Caldwell stopped writing and stared at the page as if the ink had moved. Morning brought snow again, fine as sifted flour. We found the first tracks behind the shack, pressed into the new fall, a pair of marks like small hooves, but set oddly, as if the creature had stepped with one foot before the other, like a man favouring an injury. They ran in a straight line for 50 yards, then ended at bare sand where no wind had blown. I measured them with my rule, 3 inches across at the widest, and sunk deeper than any fox or dog could have managed on that crust. Caldwell wanted to photograph them and set up his folding camera on its tripod, but the plate fogged in its holder, though the air was dry. He swore softly and blamed his chemicals. We followed the line east toward the Molucca, and the land began to swallow sound. The wagon had been left at Hamilton. We went on foot with packs, and our steps made no proper crunch, only a dull press as if the snow were full of ash. Even our talk fell away. At times I heard far ahead the creak of leather as though another man walked with us, and when I halted, the creak halted also. Fenwick glanced back once, and his face showed irritation rather than fear. "Do not answer it," he said, and his knife stopped whittling in his hand. On 23rd January, we reached the outskirts of Smithville, where a telegraph operator told us that a thing had flown over Leeds Point the night before and left marks on a roof. Men there had fired into the dark until their barrels smoked. The operator laughed as he spoke, yet his hand shook when he passed O'Hara the message slip. Outside, a cart horse stood with its head low, refusing oats. We watched its ears twitch at a sound none of us had named. That afternoon the fog came, not from any river, but lifting from the needles under our boots. It made a low ceiling, and in it the light turned the colour of pewter. The temperature fell within a few rods, so sharply that my breath iced upon my scarf, while my back still sweated from the march. Caldwell said it was a hollow, a simple pocket of cold air, yet the cold moved with us, matching our pace. At the edge of a cedar thicket we found a rabbit, stiff and whole, laid upon the snow with no blood and no mark of teeth. Fenwick crossed himself, quick and embarrassed, and would not touch it. Near dusk, we heard a cry close enough to set the hairs under my cap on end. It began like a mare in distress, then broke into something that had the shape of laughter. O'Hara swung his lantern toward it, and the flame guttered blue. My compass, hanging from my watch chain, spun twice and settled pointing due south, though the road lay west. In the same instant, a shadow passed over us, swift as a thrown cloak, and the lantern glass rang as if struck by a pebble from above. Caldwell cried out, and something hissed in the fog, not steam, but breath. The horse loaf broke off. We stood in the sudden quiet, hearing only our hearts and the soft patter of snow shaken from high boughs that no wind stirred above our heads. We did not sleep that night. We made a small fire behind a sand hummock, and the fog thickened until the flames seemed to burn inside a sack. Fenwick laid 3 thin lines of pine needles in the snow around our bedrolls. "So, I may know where the ground shifts," he said. At first light, we returned to where the lantern glass had rung. On the crust lay dark grains like stove cinders. They were warm to the touch and smelled of old iron. Above, a pine limb had been snapped and twisted down, hanging by a strip of bark. O'Hara climbed to see and came down silent, sap on his palms. We pushed north toward the cedar swamps that feed the Batstow, guided by old blaze marks, squares cut decades before by surveyors. More than once my compass settled in a quarter my map did not allow, and I began to steer by the pale winter sun until the fog returned in sheets. Late on the 24th, we came upon a deer yard that lay empty, though tracks should have been thick. The brush showed passage without a proper trail, as if something had lifted itself. Caldwell said hunters had driven the deer out. Fenwick only shook his head. Toward evening, we heard a dog barking, clear and ordinary, and we followed it in spite of ourselves. The bark never changed in distance or cadence. Then it became Caldwell calling my name, in Caldwell's own tone, from among the pines ahead. O'Hara stiffened. Fenwick seized my sleeve. "Do not go." The voice stopped, and the sudden silence made my ears ring. The wind died. The pine tops did not whisper. We walked through a world that had forgotten to make noise, and even our breath sounded indecent. When Caldwell tried to clear his throat, the sound came thin and far away, as though he spoke from the end of a hall. On January 25th, in a narrow clearing near an old charcoal pit, we found damage that no weather could make. My plane table, strapped to a sapling, lay 10 feet away with its legs bent. The leather straps were cut, not torn, and each cut showed a clean edge. O'Hara said no knife he knew would slice so straight through stiff hide in such cold. Caldwell suggested boys. Fenwick answered with an oath and could not keep his hands steady enough to light his pipe. That same day, the country began to fold upon itself. We marched by my reckoning 2 hours south to reach the Batstow Road. Yet we came again to the charcoal pit, our own boot prints laid over with a new narrow trail of hooves. Those hoof marks crossed our steps, climbed a fallen log, and ended upon the smooth face of a boulder, as if the stone had swallowed them. Caldwell tried to take another plate, but his shutter stuck fast, and when he forced it, the bellows tore at the corners. O'Hara laughed once, a hard sound, and said the woods were turning our tools against us. As the light failed, I saw between 2 cedars a pale shape rise and settle, like canvas catching wind. It showed no full body, only an angle and a long and tapering tail that swung below the branch. When Fenwick lifted his hand toward it, a hot gust rolled past my cheek, rank with musk, and the boughs trembled though the air stayed still. On the nearest pine were 5 grooves down the bark, each longer than my handspan, and set too far apart for any cat. At the bottom, the wood was blackened as if charred, yet it had not burned. I scraped it with my pocket knife, and the dust stung my nose like pepper. That night, the smell came in earnest, wet horse and stagnant water with something sweet beneath, like rotting apples. It clung to our coats. Caldwell gagged and spat. O'Hara said it was a carcass in the swamp. Fenwick kept staring into the dark, as if watching a man approach across a field. Just after midnight, our fire sank at once, as if pressed from above, and the light went out. We heard, very near, a wings folding, leather upon leather, then short steps on frozen ground, and the click of hooves. A breathing followed, slow and deliberate, as though it tasted each of us. O'Hara struck match after match, and none would take. Caldwell fumbled for the lantern, and when it lit, the flame burned low and red. In that weak light, we saw tracks appear where none had been, as if the snow remembered them a moment late. They led from the pines to within 3 yards of our bedrolls, then turned and vanished into bare sand. We spoke of turning back at dawn. Had I understood then that the thing we followed made sport of our measures, I would have taken the first road to Hamilton. Instead, I listened to Caldwell's insistence that every panic had its object, and to O'Hara's oath that no creature in New Jersey would drive him from his duty. Fenwick said, "It will not let you leave unless it is done with you," and walked toward the cedar swamp. On 26th January, we went in after it, into the cedar swamp Batstow, where water lay under a skin of ice. Fenwick led with his pole, Caldwell with the lantern, and I with compass and glass. O'Hara kept to the rear, rifle ready, saying little. Near midnight, the fog tightened among the trunks, and the air shifted in pockets, mild for a breath, and then so cold that my eyelashes crusted. The musk returned, thick as grease. A cough sounded overhead, childlike and wet, and answered itself from behind us in the same cadence. The lantern flame bent sideways, as if a door had opened. I stepped and sank ankle deep, the water numbing through my boot. The light fell upon a shape perched on a branch, body high as a pony, hind legs ending in hooves, wings folded like a bat's, and a narrow head that turned with a quick, knowing motion. Its eyes glowed red, not like firelight on an animal, but as if lit from within. O'Hara fired once. The report dulled in the fog. The creature opened its mouth and gave the laughter cry we had heard across the flats, and it launched. It passed over us without striking, yet the rush of it drove the lantern smoke flat, and something like a whip brushed my cheek. On the snow beneath the branch lay one hoofprint filled with blood-dark slush and a dragging mark that ended in clean sand. At dawn, we fled along the run toward Batstow village. Caldwell limped, his ankles swelling, and his notes shook in his hand. Fenwick did not look back at all. O'Hara walked as if under orders, but his face had gone the color of tallow. Once, behind us, the same cough rose and fell, and our mule snapped its lead and bolted into the brush. In Hamilton, the station agent sent for the marshal, who wrote our statements and smiled as though indulging drunkards. Caldwell filed by telegraph to Camden, yet in print he called it an unknown bird, and he left out the cinders, the cuts like a tool, and the voice that wore our own tones. I kept those particulars in my notebook with a sketch of that single hoofprint. I never offered it to any editor, for what court could weigh it? In 1917, I met O'Hara outside the recruiting office in Trenton. He had gone grey at the temples, and when a boy in the alley coughed in that wet cadence, he seized my elbow until it hurt. In 1924, I returned to Batstow with 2 game wardens and a theodolite, hoping to measure my memory against the land. My compass still swung south in the same pocket of cold, and on a cedar near the run, the 5 black grooves stood deeper than before, as if freshened by a hand. Each winter the river ice sang, and I saw the lantern flame bend and a hoofprint slowly fill itself.